What's going on,
Alex.
everyone? I think we are. We're gearing up here for another great edition of our Zoom Hangouts. I think we're getting everything set up. So I'll just go ahead and start introducing. I might have to do it again when we get fully going. But over to, I don't know where he's on your screen, somewhere on here. The one that says Robert Cessna, that's Robert Cessna. He's with the Eagle. He is the legendary Aggie reporter extraordinaire. But he's not the most important person in here. The most important person in here is the guy that isn't me or Robert Cessna. That's Brett Vito of the Denton Record Chronicle, covers all things University of North Texas. And what a week to have someone who covers University of North Texas on this, as the SEC goes all conference only. That negates the UNT matchup that A&M had this year. Brett, what's kind of the vibe you're getting from officials over there? I know there's a hefty fee that was going to be paid for that game, but there's also force majeure clauses, act of God clauses in there. What's kind of the rumblings you're hearing up in Denton?
Well, it's going to be interesting because that is a heck of a lot of money for North Texas. Hang on just a second.
He's getting a scoop. This is good.
Yeah, I know. Live. This is like Adam Schefter.
It's not a scoop. I just needed to tweet my story on the NCAA delay of the fall.
Oh, right.
Which I was kind of rushing to finish that up when you guys called. So, it's very interesting. The thing that's going to impact North Texas is just the financial end of it. That decision. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I got it. So the point here is that that's going to be a big deal for North Texas because as a smaller program, those money games are vitally important. And I have a series of stories that are going to begin later in the week on just how important they are for North Texas. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be pretty bad because if you think about it, North Texas has a budget of about $40 million, and you start adding up all the money that's gone away, and it gets to be pretty big. I mean, you talk about Ren Baker earlier this year estimated that the loss of fall sports championships was going to cost North Texas $2.5 million. All right, there we go. Now we got it. So you're talking about $2.5 million there. And then you talk about potentially another $1.5 million for the Texas A&M game. And then you start getting into it where it adds up. You start getting into a pretty significant amount of what North Texas is losing there. And that doesn't even count like you're talking about the summer events. They have a coach's caravan that's a big financial draw for them. So this isn't just it's one little guarantee game. It's not a big deal if it goes away. It's huge for North Texas. That's a ton of money. And I don't think they're going to let this – they're not going to take this line down. I think North Texas is going to fight this tooth and nail for that money because if you look at the contract, there's a buyout in there for $1 million that A&M would have to pay to get out of the contract. Everybody knows that. Everybody's looked at it. Mm-hmm. But A&M's AD, Ross Bjork, comes on and says, well, I don't think we're going to have to pay that. Well, North Texas looks at the contract. If they're going to go play 10 games in the SEC – How can you look at the force majeure clause in that deal in unforeseen circumstances and all the things that it lists and say, well, that gets us out of playing North Texas and giving them that $1 million buyout, but we're going to go play 10 games in the SEC. Mm-hmm. That's going to be North Texas's contention there. How do you get through that?
Not to mention earlier before, both talking to me and Cease as well as on their in-house radio show, when talking about why they should play their full schedule out, Bjork was on record saying, why is it any safer for us to fly to South Carolina than it is for UNT and ACU just to drive down and play at Kyle Field?
Yeah, and that's the point. I mean, I was talking to one of North Texas's boosters is a big-time lawyer. I was talking to him the other day. He's a corporate litigation guy, and I just from the people that you talk to, I just don't think that there's any way they're going to take this line down. I think they're going to try every which way to get that extra money because that's the kind of money that makes a big difference for a Conference USA level program.
Now, what about negotiations? They might go ahead and say, well, North Texas might say, well, give us 2 return dates in the next 10 years that we can go down and play 2 games at Kyle Field. Do you think that's a possibility for North Texas when they negotiate, or you think they'll just go for the flat out $1 million right now?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, and what Bjork said is we're certainly willing to push. We're willing to kick the can down the road, right? You know, he's on record for saying, well, we'll just reschedule these for later. And, you know, I think he's got a point there. But if you're North Texas, I mean, you want the money. You don't just want to kick it down to 2024 or whatever. Well, hey, you guys can come and play us in 2024. I mean, that doesn't do UNT a heck of a lot of good now. And UNT's trying to get out of these games anyway. Baker's made a very big point to try to reduce the number of guaranteed body bag, you know, whatever you want to call them, games that they have on their schedule. So I don't think he's dying to put a whole bunch more A&M games on the schedule from now until infinity and eternity there. I think he's looking for, we need the money. And, you know, I don't think they're going to be real willing to talk about, well, we'll just schedule this further on down the road.
What was the vibe with the fan base? Was this I mean, it is A&M, it is a Texas school. I know UNT plays a lot of these guarantee games, and they play Texas schools, regional rivals. Was this a game that everyone was pretty bummed out about, or was it kind of all about the money in the sense?
Well, I think North Texas fans look forward to these games every year, but I don't think North Texas fans are at least a lot of them are a huge fan of, hey, let's go take our team to go to Texas or LSU or Oklahoma and get absolutely railroaded, get all of our players taken off in stretchers. And then the next week when we play SMU, or down the line when we're playing SMU in Houston, you know, we're going to be beat to heck. I mean, a lot of these North Texas fans that have been around forever, it's gotten a lot better, but a lot of them remember the first game of the Todd Dodge era, which was a disaster, where they went to Oklahoma and lost 79-10. They remember when they lost 65-0 to North Texas. I mean, a lot of people that are fans of these large, you know, Power 5 programs, they think, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be really neat for these fans to come experience Kyle Field or, you know, Death Valley, you know, places like that. But the core North Texas fans, what they really want to see is they want to see their team succeed. So, I mean, how is playing at A&M in a game you're probably going to lose, and you're probably going to lose in a huge way, and you're probably going to get a lot of your star players killed? I mean, I don't think a lot of them really look forward to that. I know a lot of these guys are like, I would love to see it if we just never played any of these Power 5 teams. You know, you gotta think of upside versus downside. And for a lot of these North Texas fans, they don't see a whole lot of upside. I mean, what's the upside of going to A&M? I mean, maybe there's a 1 in a gazillion chance that you pull it off, that you pull the upset. But I mean, if you look over the course of history of these games, that is incredibly rare. I mean, maybe you're the Louisiana Monroe that beats Alabama. Sure, yeah, that happens every once in a while. But I think that the entirety of the experience for most G5 teams, the sensible fans look at it and say, well, yeah, we get $1 million out of it. What would we really get out of it otherwise, except for getting killed?
Mm-hmm.
Brett, you touched on the loss of money, and being here at A&M, which is one of the richer schools when you look across the nation about how much money they get from their donors and contracts and whatever. How does North Texas make that up? I mean, have they taken steps? We hear about coaches getting salary cuts and, you know, cuts in the athletic departments. We haven't seen anything like that at A&M. How will North Texas make up $4 or $8 million they need to pick a seventh of their budget or whatever?
Well, we've addressed that in a couple of stories we've written over time that Baker's talked about. And what he talked about is he divided all their expenses into 3 buckets: essential, something we'd like to do, and things that would be totally elective. And they've eliminated a lot of those things that they just would like to do, but, you know, financially don't make a lot of sense. And, you know, one good example is the UNT soccer team, which is the best team on campus by far. They swapped around their schedule so that they could go play a big money game at A&M instead of traveling out of state to a tournament. And that saved them a lot of money there. And there's a lot of those little things like that. They've trimmed here, trimmed there, and there's enough that goes on at a big place even in North Texas is a pretty big athletics department. So they've kind of cut the corners. The interesting thing that they haven't done is they haven't furloughed anybody and they haven't cut any salaries, because that's what a lot of schools have done. They've gone, there's a ton of examples out there. Iowa State, a lot of other schools out there have said, oh, our big name coaches that make a ton of money are going to take a 10% haircut, or the AD is going to make a little bit less. And Baker has been adamantly against that. He says we value people. That's one of his big mantras. So we're not going to cut the salaries of the people that are helping us get to where we want to go. We're going to try to go about this in different ways. And so that's the one thing that they haven't done still. And I find that pretty interesting.
So what does it look like from here? There's conference decisions to be made. There's non-conference schedules to be replaced. What does it look like from here for UNT?
Well, I mean, so after you lose the A&M game, and the other big thing that was hanging out there was their other non-conference games were Houston Baptist, which is in the Southland, and then they have 2 games against AAC schools. They have Houston and SMU. So the AAC's decision today to go with an 8-game conference season and let everybody play their non-conference games, as many as they can get in, I think bodes well for them, because they'd be able to get the Houston and SMU games in. And Houston Baptist, that was the team when Louisiana Tech, they were supposed to play. Was it Prairie View? I think it was Prairie View. They lost Prairie View, but they replaced them with Houston Baptist. So the indications are that Houston Baptist is still going to play. So they have those 3 games. They still look like they'll go off in non-conference play in football. The other thing they did, which was interesting, is they decided to kick the can down the road and not start any of their fall sports competition until I think it was September 1st. We broke that story. So that meant the elimination of four games in August for soccer, which was some of their good non-conference games. Soccer also lost Hawaii because Hawaii's not going anywhere. They were supposed to come to town to play. And volleyball lost a season opening tournament. So that was the other big move that they have made. So you're looking at losing A&M, but the other 3 football games are still look like they're a go at this point. And then they just pushed everything a little bit back for those 2 other fall sports.
Sure. Well, and it's a curious dilemma to talk about, because the conversation at the Power 5 level is they're going to conference only because they can control testing. They can control testing protocols. They can make sure that everything is safe. But you have these group of 5 schools that might not necessarily even have the budget to be able to test at the same capacity. And yet they're kind of now in the world where they're going to have to play interconference games to be able to fill these schedules and put butts in the seats. And the haves and have nots there, it's really fascinating that this is the reason why they're doing it, but it seems like this is what's going to have to be done at the lower levels anyway.
I'm highly skeptical of the whole idea that, well, the reason we're not going to go play, the reason the Power 5 isn't going to go play these G5 schools is because of the testing isn't as good or this or that. I don't buy the fact. North Texas is testing just like it is testing across the board. They put in a really good testing program. And, granted, a lot of these other schools don't have the budget for it, but, they're going to test. I mean, they're not just going to say, hey, we're just not going to test anybody, or we're not going to test at the same level as the Power 5 schools. I mean, the reason that the Power 5 is keeping the conference games and not the games that they go play the Group 5 is because the financial ones, the ones that make a financial impact, are the big conference games. Those are the ones that make a difference. Those are the ones that the fans want to see and things like that, except for your SEC versus the ACC, rivalry games and things like that. So you lose some of those, but I don't think anybody at the Power 5, just in my humble opinion, is saying, you know what, I'm really sad that we're not going to see North Texas and Texas A&M, or we're not going to see, those kinds of games. I don't think it has a whole hell of a lot to do with testing. I think it has a whole hell of a lot more to do with money and what fans are interested in, if you just ask me for my opinion.
Sure. Well, then what does, as far as what does the testing situation look like at UNT, and how is the return to play shaped up for the program?
we did a big story about it when they set up their testing process, and it was very interesting how it all played out, because their original plan was they were going to antibody test all their student athletes as they came back, and they were going to PCR swab all their staff members as they came back. And that was the plan when they first started, and they brought back football first, and they brought them back in 4 waves. Well, they had a series of positive antibody tests, and then they had some positive tests among their staff, and they decided to change their protocol. They decided, okay, we're not going to do this thing where we're going to antibody test our athletes. We're going to test everybody across the board. So they went ahead and swabbed everybody, and they've had a series of positive tests among athletes and among staff. They've had some staff and athletes recover from COVID-19 infections. So it changed a little bit as they got into it. But at this point, they feel good about what they've done in terms of testing and social distancing their kids. And I think they've done okay. I mean, I forget what the last total was from the last story we wrote. And they just went back and retested a whole bunch of athletes and staff. And we should have those results here later in the week. But I think they've done a pretty good job with it. I mean, once they changed their mind and decided to swab everybody, they went ahead and swabbed everybody, and they've had some positive tests, but it seems like they've been able to contain it to where you're not having some big massive outbreak like happened at places like Clemson and things like that.
So they go ahead and release results to you guys, Brett, give it by sport or overall. How do they release their numbers, or you said you got the numbers. How do they release your numbers?
They aren't releasing them per se. Now I've got a source that is providing them to me. So they're not releasing them publicly, but
gotcha.
There was someone in the athletic department said, okay, it's not like A&M where there's 15 people covering the team. You know what I mean? We're kind of the local outlet. We're the ones that travel with them and cover them on a day-to-day basis. They do have like a recruiting website where they do a lot of that kind of stuff. But we've gotten an arrangement where they've fed us the results of what they've got so far. So that's where we've been able to get it from.
Well, isn't that nice?
Yeah, it has been nice, actually.
I was going to say that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not going to protest that. So, so we've been able to get results from UNT, and they've provided us what the numbers. There's a source in there that'll provide those to us, and so we just get them and kind of go from there and see how things are going.
Switching gears, if we could, North Texas, the last couple of years had great records. Throwing quarterback, I remember getting a lot of national pub. Last year, they kind of fall off. Is this going to be a crucial year for the Mean Green, or take us through what you expect from this team this year?
Well, and that's the $1 million question, because North Texas was really on a consistent rise under Seth Luttrell. They did really well. I mean, he took over a program that was an absolute dumpster fire at the end of when McCarney was there. Now, McCarney did a lot of great things and had them on the upswing, but then some things happened and it kind of cratered out. And he took over a program that wasn't expected to do a lot, and he took them to 3 straight bowl games. They got in on a 5-7 record his first year because they had a ridiculously good APR under Dan McCarney. He was real big on kids going to class and doing the right things, and that helped them get started. And then they won 9 games the next 2 years. And the expectation was last year was they would be, if not the conference champion, they'd be right up there with Florida Atlantic and people and teams like that. And largely because they had such a great quarterback come back. Mason Fine was the leading active passer in Division I college football coming back last year. He put up a ridiculous amount of stats over the years. They had a lot of good pieces around him, and then it just completely fell apart. They lost a couple of close games. They had a few guys go down with injuries. Their chemistry was terrible. And then they go 4-8. Well, now Mason walked out the door, one of the greatest quarterbacks in program history. Maybe not the greatest quarterback in program history. There's a guy that played 8 years in the NFL, Steve Ramsey, that came from North Texas, but statistically the best guy. And you also had Ladarius Hamilton, real good defensive end. He's with the Cowboys now. They lost four key offensive linemen. They lost, a couple of guys out of the secondary who were real important. So now the question is, what happens with these guys? They're not going to be one of the favorites in Conference USA. Of course, that changed a little bit the other day. I don't know if you guys saw Chris Robinson, the quarterback from Florida Atlantic, just vanished off the roster. So that's going to change the status of the league a little bit. But, a lot of people think Atlantic, UAB, teams like that are going to be at the top of the league. Southern Miss with Jack Abraham coming back. So North Texas goes back into the underdog role. And the question is, can they find a quarterback? Can they rebuild their defense? And what's it going to be like with 5 new assistant coaches? So, they're back into the who knows what you're going to get from North Texas deal here, especially since they don't really have a real obvious option at quarterback. So the question, and the schedule is not real favorable either. Even with A&M off the schedule, you got Houston, you've got SMU, who are both look like they're going to be good teams this year. They're going to have to go to UAB in Birmingham. That's a tough game. So the question is how they rebound from last year. Can they kind of put it back together?
Yeah. Switching gears again, something that I've asked all of the journalists that we've had on here, because of course, we've gone through these summer times with no sports, we've just leaned back on nostalgia. So let's lean back on nostalgia a little bit again. As you look back on your career, looking through different athletes, different organizations, different teams that you've covered, what is maybe one of those highlight moments, highlight players, funniest moments when you kind of think back and think, this is the story I want to tell that is my favorite so far, that we can share with the people?
Favorite story? Oh, there's been a lot of good ones over the years. I think one of the funniest things about the way my career has kind of unfolded is people always ask you, who is the best athlete you ever covered over the years? And the funny thing about what happened with me was when I graduated from school, I ended up working at the Sherman Denison paper right out of the box. And I went there and I was covering high schools at a small college, and it was a junior college. And one of the first guys that was on that team that I got to know was a guy by the name of John Lackey. So he started at UTA. He was from Abilene, and he went to UTA as a first baseman. And then he transferred to Grayson because he grew a little bit, and they decided he might have a chance as a pitcher. And for the next couple of years, there was a really good team around him. So I saw those guys go win the College World Series. And then the year after that, so they went and won a national championship, and I saw them win it again. And it was pretty interesting because Lackey was on that team. There was about, I think, 3 other guys that made the major leagues. And, so I got a chance to cover one of the better pitchers of his generation when he was just getting started at a tiny junior college in Denison, Texas. That's awesome. I got to follow him. And then after I left there, I went to work for the Abilene Reporter News. So then I got to cover, we covered him. We wrote about it when when the Angels went to the World Series and won it. So I kind of got to cover the beginnings of his career, which is kind of a neat experience. Somebody, you get to see them at the very formative level when he just started out in junior college, and you kind of watch him grow into, one of the best pitchers of his generation.
Yeah. Zeus, you got anything else?
No, I'm just trying to think, as North Texas, being one of those mid-major schools, a lot of people, I can remember saying Denton was growing so much, get McCarney. What about North Texas as evolving, mid-major? What do you see its future overall in all sports?
I think they're on a really good track. They made what looks like a terrific hire in their athletic director, Ren Baker, who came in a couple of years ago. He's made a lot of really good decisions, and he's been able to raise a lot of money. I'm coming out with a series of stories here the next few days about where UNT is positioned as it looks to survive the pandemic. But they've brought in 5 for North Texas is a big amount. 5 donations of at least $1 million since 2016 in Baker's tenure. They opened an indoor practice facility. I think it was like an $18 million indoor practice facility for football. They opened a brand new track and field stadium just a couple of years ago, all under Baker's tenure. And they've really had a lot of success. The men's basketball team won the conference USA regular season title last year. So things really seem to be on the upswing here with a lot of their programs and a lot of the money they've been able to invest in facilities. And the question will be, can they establish themselves as maybe the top program in Conference USA? And then maybe, you always, the dream for North Texas is that somehow the wheels of realignment start to turn a little bit again, and maybe they have a chance to, jump to a higher level league, or maybe things shake up again and they can get into a league with, maybe some of the other higher level Texas and Oklahoma type schools in the region, sometime down the line. But the trajectory of the program looks really good at this point.
There you go. Well, that is Brett Vito. I would say, say hi to all the Denton high school coaches like John Walsh and those guys from back when I was covering high schools up there. But I think everyone's abandoned ship up there and turned over. Am I right?
Yeah, Walsh is gone. Joey Florence is still the AD here.
Okay. Yeah, Joey was.
I don't do a lot with the high school stuff, but yeah, a lot of the high school coaches have turned over. The guy at Argyle is still there, whose name is going to escape me now. Todd Rogers.
Yeah,
he's still there. So there, a lot of the high school guys are still around. And that's the interesting thing about Denton is, there's a lot of really good high school football here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good players and a lot of good coaches in this town.
Don't have to stare into those baby blues of John Walsh anymore. Anyway, thanks so much for giving us some time. Tell the people where's the best way to find your work and find you on social media.
Fortunately, I have a fairly unique name, so it's just at Brett Vito. There wasn't anybody else that had taken that Twitter account there, so that it's at Brett Vito, and then of course our website is DentonRC.com. RC stands for Record Chronicle, so it's DentonRC.com.
Gotcha. Well, before we go, I know we had one question, A&M related, from our Facebook Live, and it's referring to the reported tight end Glenn Beal getting into the transfer portal. Something we haven't confirmed yet, but it would make sense to us. He's kind of been a guy who I believe he was already in the transfer portal once before, and Jimbo brought him back off. Am I not mistaken about that, Cease?
Went in there middle of last year, and we thought he was gone. He came back with like 2 games to go. So this is a repeat, and I guess maybe he's added 10 pounds of muscle and feels the second time around the portal will be better, or he checked the tight end waiver wire and there's a need for him because of the coronavirus. But
he'll be behind.
Maybe needs a better agent.
He'll be behind Jalen Weidemeyer and Baylor Cupp heading into this season. So we're working on confirming that.
Yeah, at least behind those guys.
And we'll get you that information.
And they got a good freshman coming in from North Texas too, if I'm not mistaken. They got a good tight end coming in.
Yes,
they signed from up there. His name is right now.
Right, you're right. Well, we'll get that information to you pretty soon as we were setting up this.
Yeah.
Brett, thanks so much for taking a few minutes, and we will.
Brett, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Enjoyed it.
It's Blake Smith from Southlake. That's the tight end coming in.
See, I knew it was up there somewhere. I knew it was an easy name like Jones.
Yeah, the great Alex Miller chiming in with that for us. So anyway, thank you, Brett. Thank everyone for tuning in, and we should be back next week with another one of these.